lots of people about flooding issues in the county. We were asking questions, what causes flooding, what can the county do. So we have numerous answers all across the board, but most people thought that the county should do something to address flooding issues. We asked for a little bit more specific input on what you thought was important or not so important, and as far as options that the county could move forward on regarding flooding. Prevention was somewhat important, property protection, as far as this is from a county standpoint. You know, so this is from the perspective of the county, not that property protection is not important, but how involved the county should be involved. Does that make sense? How the question was worded. Structural and engineering projects were a high priority. Emergency services were a high priority, and then sort of public outreach and awareness kind of falls in the middle. So based on those and AECOM's research on what other communities are doing, we came up with a list of options to consider. And I'm a visual person, so having it all in text was, you know, if you want to read all the details, we can provide you a copy of all the details, but in sort of short supply. So that is in your handout on the options. And of course, the first option is basically to continue to enforce the current floodplain ordinance. The commissioners were very interested in a fair and consistent application and enforcement of the current ordinance that the county has. And the county has that floodplain ordinance in order for Ray County to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. And so when we talk about the current ordinance, so the reason that they have one is to avoid the potential consequences if you don't have a flood plain ordinance. So it increases the flood insurance premiums for those people who are required to, by their lender, to have flood insurance. There's a long-term consequence for the county is that they can actually be put on probation, or SEMA, the State Emergency Management Agency, could actually pull Ray County and not allow them to participate in the flood insurance program, which for those people who are required to have insurance, that's going to increase their insurance cost. It would, there's a possibility that loans could not be made. People could not purchase property. They could not purchase houses if it lied in a flood hazard area. And that has happened. There are a couple of counties in Missouri that have lost their National Flood Insurance Program capabilities. There's one county that just after about 10 years of not having flood insurance has just finally gotten their ducks in a row and are now qualified to once again to participate in the program. Some of those counties are that I know of are on the east side of the state, so kind of north of the St. Charles area, but communities similar to Ray County, you know, so kind of on the outskirts of a big metropolitan area. Of course, there's always the possibility of lawsuits, as a lot of issues tend to get resolved in the courts, whether that's flooding or health insurance or anything else. That's one place to go. SEMA, the State Emergency Management Association, could actually take action in the county, and so people could not obtain new flood insurance. They could lose their insurance, not obtain new flood insurance. So that's kind of a summary of the importance of why the county does participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, because you are a county that is on a major riverway. It does tend to flood either due to acts of nature primarily, and then on top of that, actions taken by people and management river systems and those sorts of things. So some of the things that happen are out of humans' control, and some of those things are within humans' control, and we can't do anything about all the acts of nature and how much it rains and how much it snows. So one of the handouts that we do have is this big sort of flow chart. So this is the current flood insurance, floodplain ordinance in a flow chart. So it starts in the upper left. So if you were going to do construction in the county, unincorporated county, so we're talking not in a city limits of Richmond or Hardin or Oric or someplace like that. And just as an example, if you were going to add on to your garage, or you needed to add on to your house because your mother-in-law is moving in or something, then you would need to obtain a construction permit in order to do that. And that's just part of the county's responsibility of protecting property and life and safety in the county. And so then the applicant submits a permit application for review by the building inspector, and then it needs to look on the map, which we have the revised maps in the back if you want to look at those. And does the area of the construction or the development lie within a special flood hazard area as defined by the FEMA, SEMA maps? If it's no, then you just go through all your regular construction activities, that you would do. You would, whatever those are, you submit your preliminary plans, those get approved, you submit final plans, you get your permit to do your construction, to do your development. Then the inspector comes out and looks at that. Yes, the electrical meets the electrical code, all those things that you have to do. If you are in a special flood hazard area, then that's what all the rest of this pertains to. And the requirement that is required, whether or not you are in a floodway, yes or no. And Shanna and I, we can talk about some of those definitions. You have questions as we go through these options on definitions of a floodplain versus what is a floodway, and what is now called the 1% chance flood hazard area versus the 0.5% flood chance hazard areas that are now on the new FEMA maps, and what those mean. So these are the way the current ordinance is written, and hopefully, laid out like this, it's a little bit easier to understand. And so these are the requirements that when we talk about enforcing the current floodplain ordinance, this is what we are talking about. And it also does not prohibit construction or development in a floodway or a floodplain, but if that is where the construction or the development is occurring, then this summarizes the requirements for that to happen. Does that make sense? I'm just wanting to make that clear, that the floodplain ordinance doesn't necessarily prohibit certain actions or development from occurring in a special flood hazard area, but it specifies the requirements for that to happen. And most of that is to protect the property and the lives of adjacent property owners, downstream, upstream property owners, which is in the responsibility of the county commissioners. Okay. Any questions on this? I know some of you need to leave, so we're going to move forward. So, enforce the current ordinance so that you can participate in the flood insurance program. The NFIP requires communities to adopt an ordinance, and the current ordinance will need to be revised and adopted to accept the new FEMA maps, and that needs to happen by June of this year. They do have the authority to restrict buildings and levees, such as structures, but it doesn't necessarily prohibit them. And it's all based on what the base flood elevation, and some of you were asking about what those elevations are, and SEMA does have that information. There's a way for you to actually get that elevation number to kind of answer that question, and what is the base flood elevation. So it includes provisions to limit the rise to no more than 1 foot above the base flood elevation, maintaining development and building permits, and basically document anything that happens without a permit. And that is a requirement of SEMA in order for the county to continue to participate in the flood insurance program. So it does allow berms and levees with permits. If you are actually working in a floodway, then there are additional requirements, as we talked about, and having an engineer involved and to certify the changes that are going to be made. Alterations to stream channels oftentimes has a lot more requirements outside of the floodplain ordinance. Most of those are going to be state and federal regulations. So alterations of stream channels, from the county perspective, requires a maintenance plan on maintaining those changes that are made, and notification to state and federal agencies. Other agencies, such as Department of Natural Resources, has land disturbance permits. The Corps of Engineers has Section 401 and 404 permit requirements for altering stream channels. And for a lot of the areas in the southern part of the county, those stream channels are within the Corps of Engineers jurisdiction, because since they are so close to the Missouri River, they are still considered the waters of the United States, which is the legal definition of what the Corps of Engineers is responsible for. And waters of the United States has a very specific definition, but it all comes from the Department of Commerce. So the best example is the Missouri River is a water of the United States because it is an interstate waterway. It was used for interstate commerce, maybe not so much today as it was 100 years ago, when those terms were developed and those legal definitions were made. But major waterways like the Crooked River, like the Little Blue, like the Blue River, like the Kansas River. Of course, the Kansas River is more of an interstate waterway because it flows into Missouri before it flows into the Missouri River. So those are all considered waters of the United States, and those come under the purview of the Corps of Engineers. So towards the end, the building inspector inspects projects to document compliance. In some instances, the permittee needs to submit their elevation certificate and as-built drawings. And we talked about the consequences of noncompliance, which everyone can read, and we've talked about that. The last one I had mentioned before, losing flood insurance program, being able to participate in that, and it's not just related to flood. So if Ray County were to be put on probation or to lose their qualification to participate in NFIP, then if the county were hit with another natural disaster, such as a tornado, the county would not be able to receive state or federal assistance from that natural disaster. So it has consequences beyond just flooding hazards from an economic standpoint. And also the loss of development grants. I know Molly is working hard on some economic development in Ray County. So some of the requirements and the consequences of noncompliance reach beyond the farm and reach beyond the streamway. They can affect the entire county.
Can you show that last slide? This slide before.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, please
Yeah, stop us.
speak up.
That's also on your flow chart, or on that one page there.
Yes, it's it's on the wrong page.
It's good. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. Now, Shanna's going to talk about, since she put this part together, about potential options for the county to consider.
When the county approached us regarding this issue, we had to go back in and look at the current floodplain ordinance. Anytime you join the NFIP, based on what flood hazard that you have on your maps, whether it's an A zone, which means there's no base flood elevations, they just assume, and I don't want to say that, but that it's an approximate. It says, okay, the flooding goes back here. We don't really know if it's 653 on the elevation, but you know, here it is, there's a flood zone. Then you have to adopt a certain level of ordinance. And as you have more developed floodplain maps, which lead to floodway and cross-section and base flood elevations, your level of ordinance continues to rise. There are certain minimum requirements that FEMA says you have to have this in place to be in compliance. Ray County can go further and have a stronger ordinance, or you know, they can adopt the minimums. All right? As their ordinance currently reads, and to get it correct here, that anyone who builds will not increase the water surface elevation of the 100-year flood more than 1 foot on the average cross-section. That's in the current floodplain ordinance that was adopted in '97. So when Carla was telling you earlier, they have the right to regulate levees, which seems to be what is mostly needed in a predominantly agricultural county. It is there. If those levees are causing an increase in the base flood elevation anywhere along those cross-sections along that river, or even backing up backwater into tributaries, that is currently covered under the floodplain ordinance. However, some of the options that they could do is they could come in and they can strengthen it. They can clarify definitions. Levee is currently not within the floodplain ordinance. It's not specified, but they could. They could get really technical. The county could come in and say, this is how we define a levee. You cannot build a levee unless it meets this definition. As we all know, when you have more strict regulations, there's less wiggle room, there's less cooperative working together. So it's always better to try and work together beforehand before they come in and try to enforce something more strict. Fees. Currently, there is a fine within the ordinance. It is set. They can up those fees. They can say if you illegally build in the floodplain and you haven't gotten your permits and we haven't authorized it, you can be fined up to whatever number they want. Let's say $1,000 a day. Nobody wants to pay that. You know, I think currently now it's just a few hundred, but you know, they can make it very economically incentive for you to cooperate. Adjust penalties for noncompliance, same thing. You could have to pay, like I said, like $1,000 a day. More permitting fees could be applied. It just depends on, you know, what they decide to do, or what would work out best for the county to ensure compliance so that everybody is able to maintain their flood insurance. The no increase in base flood elevation, this is a very simple statement. There's a lot of communities and counties across the nation that have this, that basically say, it doesn't matter what you develop in the floodplain. We don't care if you're putting fill. We don't care if you're building a new house on stilts. Whatever you put that's in the regulatory 100-year or 1% floodway will not cause an increase in base flood elevation. Okay, right now, they allow for 1 foot of development, or 1 foot rise. The issue that you have when you have that 1 foot rise is if your neighbor A over here has put in a levee, or let's say they have put in fill because they want to raise their pole barn off in the floodplain, and that has caused a 1 foot rise, well then neighbor B, they can't come in and put fill to raise their pole barn, because then that would cause 2 foot of rise. So whatever neighbor A is doing, neighbor B has to be aware of that, and so does the county. Because if you're both putting it in at the same time, then now all of a sudden we may have a cumulative of a 3 foot rise in base flood elevation, and neighbor C further downstream, who wasn't doing anything wrong and had no problems prior to, now they have 5 feet of water in their basement. So it's one of those things where we're not going through the permitting so everybody's kind of aware of what's going on, and we don't regulate that development. Now we have thrown other people downstream into the mix, and their result might be we're going to sue neighbor A and neighbor B because now we're being flooded every time it rains. So one of the changes that I don't necessarily think would inhibit development, but it does make it nice and safe for everybody, is the no change in the base flood elevation. So basically whatever you do, whatever development, whatever substantial improvement, whatever improvements you want to make, you just cannot change that base flood elevation. The downside to that for most homeowners and or developers is you obviously need to have an engineer come in, run that section and run that project through, and that comes with a cost. And I realize that, you know, the county realizes that as well. But that would ensure the safety for all of those involved upstream, downstream from the project location. We talked about adding the detailed terms to specify levies. They can specify development. They can specify the materials to use, the height to use. They could specify, if they wanted to get literal, they could specify which development firms that you could go to have it put in. You know, only certain people or certain companies could come in and do this work. We can add regulations to areas outside of the flood insurance rate map. So most of you are familiar with the flood hazard map, like we have this one over here on the wall. And they could easily come in and say, this is FEMA's regulatory 100-year. That's the bare minimum that they have to adhere to. But they could say, you know what? We're going to regulate to the 500-year. Well, that encompasses a whole new area of development that currently they don't have to regulate. You're just aware that, hey, this is your potential to have flooding here with a 0.2% chance storm or the 500-year storm. But they could easily say, you know what, it's not just the 100-year, now we're going to regulate to the 500-year. And they could go beyond that. Like with the stream setback ordinance, the other option, they could say, we want to buffer out 2 miles. We want to buffer out 2 miles from the flood hazard zone. We want to buffer out, you know, X amount of feet. And then that would inhibit development there. It's not necessarily to penalize anyone. It's just to kind of get a handle to make sure everyone understands that when you're doing that development, you're affecting somebody else when the flooding occurs. But, again, that's all if they want to add to their current ordinance. The current floodplain ordinance as it stands works really well when it's applied. Okay, so this is all just potential that the county could consider. Compensatory storage, if you are putting in development or a levee, and you're moving a stream, and you take floodplain out of here, then you have to add compensatory storage to the other side. So it basically would shift the stream, but it would keep that flooding contained within that stream channel. So basically you're not just adding in the fill onto one side of the stream and pushing the water 30 feet out to whomever may be on the other side, or, you know, if it's commercial property. That's what's intended by compensatory storage. When we get into education and outreach, that was one of the important things of why we're having this meeting, to kind of let some of those who are dealing with these practices and are having to deal with it every day, you know, potentially neighbors flooding neighbors or commercial development flooding. It's kind of just to get the information out there. A lot of people are not aware of the flood insurance program and the fact that you do kind of have to have a floodplain development permit. Nobody likes to be told what they can do with their own land. And anyone understand that. The problem comes into play in today's climate where you may be doing something on your land, but unfortunately it's affecting a neighbor's land, and now they can come back and they can sue you. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to reach out to people to understand, that we're not telling you you can't develop in the floodplain. FEMA has never said, I mean, your county could, but FEMA itself, the National Flood Insurance Program, does not say you can't develop. They just want you to develop wisely. They just want you to take certain things into consideration. So we're having public meetings. The revised floodplain maps are on the back table that everyone's allowed to look for. You can contact your county, or if you live in like the city of Richmond or Hardin, you can contact that community floodplain administrator to look at those. They are available online for anyone to look at for your property. If you need a base flood elevation, your floodplain administrator can get that for you, or you can contact SEMA. It is also in the flood insurance study, if you know how to do that for yourself. The best water management practices, that's just, you know, bonus. I realize this is kind of around the floodplain ordinance and development, but all of that information that Carla has brought for agriculture, stormwater practices, all of that is good information just overall to to reduce flood hazard. The no adverse impact. This policy requires more than just the county being involved. It involves your neighboring counties as well, because it basically takes an entire watershed approach that says no development, not only in Ray County, but in neighboring counties within this entire watershed will impact another community. This would be more of a cooperative effort, that if the community were behind, we would work with other people located within the watershed and have everyone on board. So, forgive me, I'm not sure what the
Clay
board-
County makes
Thanks.
sense.
Yeah, if your neighbor, if Cole County comes down and says, all right, we want to work with you guys, but we have this huge development coming in, and normally it would have flooded down into Ray County. Well, now they're working with you, and there's no adverse impact, so whatever they build up there, it's not going to hurt Ray County. You guys are the counties, everyone within the watershed is working together to minimize the damage that could be associated with any development and flooding. That's what the goal of no adverse impact. And it's very well used out in the eastern part of the United States, because as you know, there's a lot of overpopulation, overdevelopment, and it has worked very well to reduce the flood hazard and the losses associated with any type of flood hazard. Watershed controls. Any property owner can help to form the levee district, for example, or a watershed district, where you just kind of manage that land and you know what's going on in the development, kind of have an idea of who's building what where. This is how we're going to do it, working with the county and the state, working with all of your agencies to make sure permits are obtained, ducks are in a row, there's site surveys, engineering surveys, just kind of having a better grasp, but it's all a local grassroots effort, so it's not necessarily a governmental body coming in and telling you. It's you, the local property owners, taking charge of that and making sure you're getting the most benefit, and most economic benefit as well as development. You could design structures, as it says, more like levees, water control structures. That you might have to work with more of like Army Corps, for example. They do a lot of structure and channelization, but as a levee district or a watershed district, however you may become, you could work with those government bodies to alter for your needs. What are the benefits? Should the county stay either with their current or enforce stricter ordinance, or start to develop watershed districts and change the way floodplain management is done, is the community rating system. This is a voluntary program that FEMA offers, but it will lower the cost of your insurance program. So everything that the county or cities choose to enforce or do when related to floodplain management and stormwater practices and anything to reduce those hazards starts to lower your flood insurance cost. So currently, if you have a home and you pay a premium, a subsidized premium of $600 a year, as the county would move up in the community rating system, your insurance policy might go down to $300 a year. There's a cost savings. Each increment saves a certain percentage. So right now, the county could probably enter in as a 9 with all the checks, I's dotted and T's crossed and check marks there. And if they enter in as a 9, then they save 5% on your flood insurance premium. You can save up to 50% on your flood insurance premium, depending on what level you want to do within the community rating system. It is something that's very beneficial, and it is a good incentive for them to be able to offer to the people of Ray County as a reward for basically, going through and following best practices and best management of the floodplain and development. Some of the agencies, I'm sure you guys are really familiar with them, especially with some of the flooding that's been going on since '93 in Missouri. All of these are the federal or state agencies, or local, like your Ray County.
There's a slide for each one of those.
Oh, there? Okay, good. Each of them has some role.
Oh, I thought there was.
There might be further down. Each of them have some role in the floodplain management, development, stormwater, agricultural, conservation, soil conservation. But this is, and I'm sure you have other small ones, like EPA is not on there, but I'm sure that they would probably find a way to be involved if they wanted to. So, back up.
Okay. These are just some pictures of management practices that the agencies assist property owners with. So, and as Mark wanted us to be promoting those sorts of things. Stream bank stabilization, stream setback ordinances, terracing, erosion control for swells, or moving water off of fields. I call them swells, I guess that's an urban term. Drainage and drainage ditches that you would have coming off your farm, especially if it doesn't drain very well, and making sure that that doesn't erode and it conveys the water like it should, because there's nothing worse than having a drainage ditch and then it starting to erode back up into your field, which is what you were trying to drain to begin with. Alternative agricultural practices in floodplains with nut trees and those sorts of things that reduce erosion. So the Corps of Engineers, as I talked about, they are responsible for regulating and enforcing dredge and fill activities. And they issue permits, they require mitigation for damages. One of the examples would be the Bass Pro Shop in Independence. When that facility, when that store went in, there was damages to a wetland on that property and a tributary to the Little Blue River, and damage to that tributary. And so the Corps of Engineers required them to mitigate for that. And so they actually paid Jackson County Parks and Recreation to restore some wetlands within the Little Blue River floodplain area to mitigate for the damage that they caused. They, of course, oversee the waterways and floodplains for big river systems like the Missouri and the Mississippi. And in this area, also the Little Blue and the Blue River are core flood control projects on them. So anytime you do anything within a Corps of Engineer jurisdiction, you always have to get their involvement. They do assist communities with flooding issues, and they regulate the alteration of streams. We've already kind of talked about what SEMA does for you and for communities. And so they do assist local governments with the disaster prevention, management, relief. Unfortunately, in Missouri, we've had a lot of that in the last couple of years. 2011 was not a good year. I guess the SEMA people were busy all year long between tornadoes and the flooding of the Missouri River and levees in northwest Missouri breaking. SEMA has been very, very busy, but that is part of their responsibility. The NRCS administers the Department of Agriculture programs, which you folks are probably the most familiar with, so I don't need to go over those programs. Department of Natural Resources is responsible for water quality and stormwater runoff, and that is all under the Clean Water Act, the federal program, except for Section 401, which is alterations to streams, and 404, which is alterations and dredge and fill to wetlands of the United States. That comes under the Corps of Engineers. But they do regulate some damages to streams. They are involved in those projects with the Corps of Engineers, and they do regulate dams and impoundment structures greater than 35 feet high in the state of Missouri. So if you were to construct a flood control basement or that's kind of a control structure in a headwater area to prevent flooding downstream. Longview Lake is a good example of that. In this area, Blue Springs Lake is another Corps of Engineers, that kind of structure. The DNR does regulate those and inspect those. Department of Conservation is the Forest, Fish, and Wildlife branch. Not so much the water quality, air quality stuff, but they do work with the DNR on water quality protection issues, and of course they assist property owners with management of their land or management of systems. Bray County does have their responsibilities to protect the safety and the welfare of the people and the property, the floodplain ordinance, work with the levee and drainage districts, and to regional, state, and federal activities. So that would, an example would be if there was a tornado disaster in Ray County somewhere, then, then their responsibility is to coordinate and work with all those people and to help bring the county's resources to assist in those disasters. The next steps for this project are basically to train and provide further education, outreach to elected officials and the staff in the county, both Ray County people and municipal people like City of Richmond and Hardin and Oric, how many people we can get to come on how to best manage flooding issues and development issues in the floodplain. And this kind of is the end of our presentation, but we are asking you to voice your opinion. So we do have this chart on the wall to the left of the screen that has kind of all the summary of all the options available. And I have little sticker dots if you want to voice your opinion besides just talking to us and to the commissioners on which of the options that we talked about today do you think are the most feasible for the county to move forward with. Then that's kind of what we would like to hear. So it's kind of we call it dotocracy. So it's kind of like voting, but it kind of just gives us some idea of what people are thinking, and kind of to voice that opinion maybe in private. You know, you can choose to use your 3 dots all on one option if you so choose, or you can spread them out. We have people who do that for a lot of the meetings that we hold. It says, well, this is the option that I like, and so they put all of their dots all on that. And so that is your choice. So we're kind of done. So